The morning I stood on my parents' porch with a thrift store suitcase and a rehearsed story about losing everything, I already knew what I would find inside. But knowing something in your mind and watching it happen in front of your eyes are two entirely different kinds of pain. What I heard through that screen door before I even rang the bell, my own mother's voice, calm as Sunday, telling the neighbor that I had better arrive with my checkbook, that was the moment 14 years of hoping finally ran out. I want you to stay with me through this entire story, because what I did next was not reckless, it was not emotional, it was the most calculated, legal, and quietly devastating thing I have ever done in my professional life, and I did it because it was the only language my family had ever spoken fluently. My name is Olivia. I am 32 years old. I am the chief financial officer of a private equity firm in Charlotte, North Carolina, and for a single weekend last August, not one person in my childhood home knew any of that. Let me take you back to where this story actually begins. I grew up in a small Ohio town that the economy quietly abandoned.
My father spent 26 years on the factory floor before the plant closed. My mother worked night shifts as a nurse until her body gave out at 53. Between the two of them, they had just enough to keep the lights on, provided nothing ever went wrong. My older sister, whom I will simply call my sister because the story is not about honoring her, dropped out of college after one semester. My parents built her a small cottage behind the main house. She lived there rent-free for 12 years. Nobody ever said a word. When I was accepted to Ohio State on a half-scholarship, I walked into the kitchen with the letter in my shaking hands. I had worked 2 after-school jobs for 3 years to make that application happen. My father read the letter, set it down, and said, "Good. That is one less bill." No hug, no photograph on the refrigerator. 2 months later, my sister quit her job at the hardware store, and my mother made her favorite pot roast to cheer her up. They watched movies together all weekend. I filed that moment away. I filed away a great many moments in the years that followed.
At 22, 1 month into my first real job, a junior analyst position pulling $42,000 a year before taxes, my phone rang on a Tuesday night. It was my mother. Not to ask how my first week had gone, not to ask if I was settling in. The electric bill had gone up again. I sent $500, then $500 the next month, and the month after that. For 10 straight years, I sent money home without missing a single transfer. Have you ever given generously to someone you loved, only to realize they had never once asked how you were doing? That the calls only came when there was a number attached? In 10 years, my mother never once opened a phone call with, "How are you, Olivia?" It was always a bill. The water heater, my sister's car insurance, my father's medication, which I later discovered was already covered by his pension plan. When I was accepted to Wharton for my MBA, I called home to explain that I would need to reduce the monthly transfer while I was in school. My mother's response was to conference my sister onto the call. My sister, eating chips, told me I was going to let them drown. I wired the money anyway. I always did.
Months later, my aunt, the only person in that family who ever looked at me without calculating my worth, told me the truth. A portion of every dollar I had sent home had been quietly redirected to my sister as spending money. The math I had been doing for years had never been the math I thought it was. 3 weeks before that August weekend, my mother called with a bright, warm voice I had learned to distrust. She wanted me to come home for a 2-day barbecue. I asked if I needed an occasion. She said of course not, but I knew. My mother does not do bright unless there is a number waiting behind it. I made a decision. I would go home, but I would bring a different version of myself. I booked the flight, rented the cheapest car on the lot, then returned it before I reached the house and took a taxi instead. I dressed in plain jeans and a gray t-shirt. The suitcase I carried came from a thrift store, scuffed corners and a broken zipper. Every detail was deliberate. I had rehearsed the story. My company had folded, I had lost my position, I had nothing. I wanted to see, just once, with complete clarity, whether they would still want me at that table if I could not pay for it. I heard my mother's voice before I even rang the bell. She was talking to a neighbor through the screen door. If Olivia is coming, she had better have her checkbook. Gerald is behind on the mortgage again. 5 months behind, the neighbor confirmed. Don't tell anyone. I stood on that porch in the August heat and let my hand drop from the doorbell. I was not surprised. That was the part that frightened me most. I rang the bell. I delivered my story. And within 60 seconds of sitting down at that kitchen table, my father's first question was about the mortgage payment.
My mother asked for a timeline on my recovery. My sister, still painting her nails on the sofa, said she had always known corporate life was a house of cards. Nobody asked if I was frightened. Nobody asked where I would sleep or how I would eat. I cataloged every word and every silence with the discipline of someone who spent a career reading financial statements. The next morning, I was handed a 12-item chore list while my sister went to get her hair done. I moved picnic tables and hung string lights and swept the patio, while my father watched from the doorway with his coffee.
"You plan on sitting around here long?" he asked. I had arrived the day before. At the barbecue, in front of 20 guests, my mother transformed. "Baby girl," she said, throwing her arms around me for the neighbor to see. "Both my girls under one roof again. We are so blessed." 30 minutes earlier, she had not poured me coffee. My father pulled me aside and asked me to speak to a banker in attendance about the mortgage, as though I had not told him I was unemployed. When I said I was not in a position to help, he told me I had never been in a position to do anything for this family when it mattered. Then he walked away and said it again, louder, 6 feet from the neighbors who had gathered to eat food I had cooked at a party I had set up. "You were never really part of this family, Olivia. You left. Your sister stayed. That is the difference." My mother rushed out from the kitchen. She did not say it was not true. She said, "Not here." I walked inside. I looked in the mirror. I dried my face and walked back out. It was while getting ice from the utility room that I passed my father's office and saw my name on an opened envelope, a credit card statement.
Balance $6,200. An account I had never opened. Charged to my parents' address with transactions at my sister's salon, a furniture store in Columbus, and a gas station I had never visited. My name, my social security number, my credit. I photographed every page. I placed the statement back exactly as I had found it. I carried the ice outside and smiled for the rest of the afternoon. That night, on a cot in what used to be my bedroom, now filled floor to ceiling with my sister's shoeboxes, I called my attorney. His name is Marcus. We went to Ohio State together. He builds real estate law cases with the same patience I applied to balance sheets. I asked him one question. If someone is 5 months behind on a mortgage, what happens to that note? He told me a lender can sell a non-performing note on the secondary market at a discount. The buyer becomes the legal note holder, with every right a bank holds, including the right to initiate foreclosure if payments remain delinquent. Then I told him about the credit card opened in my name. He said, "Olivia, that is identity fraud." I said, "I know, but I do not want to press charges. I want leverage."
There was a long pause. Then he said, "Get some sleep. Call me Monday." I lay back on that cot, Brenda's shelves on both sides of me, my old yearbook spine visible behind a stack of shoeboxes. They had converted my room into her storage. They had converted my name into their credit line. They had converted my loyalty into a recurring payment. For the first time in 14 years, I felt something unfamiliar. Not rage, not grief, clarity. 3 weeks later, Marcus called from my office in Charlotte. He had located the note holder on the family home, a small regional fund looking to offload non-performing assets at a 40% discount. The price was $95,000, less than half of what I had sent to that house over the preceding decade. I wired the funds that afternoon. By end of business Thursday, the note on my childhood home had been transferred to a holding company I had formed for exactly this purpose. I was now the legal creditor on my parents' mortgage. The notice of assignment arrived at 412 Maple Street by registered delivery. My father called on a Tuesday evening. He had never called me without my mother's instruction. His voice was different.
The authority had left it entirely. "What the hell is this letter?" he said. I told him I had bought their mortgage. I was their lender now. 6 full seconds of silence. Then he said, "You cannot do this." I told him I could, and I had. And I told him just as calmly that I could do it the same way they had opened a credit card in my name without telling me, the same way they had let my sister charge $6,000 to my credit and never mentioned it. He said that was your mother's doing. I reminded him he was on the account. Both of them were. I told him I would be in Ridgemont on Saturday. My attorney would be with me. And for the first time in 32 years,
I asked him to simply listen. I arrived in a pressed suit, driving myself, Marcus beside me with a briefcase. I stood in that kitchen and I addressed each of them by what they had done. My father's first question about a payment, my mother's request for a recovery timeline, my sister's performance for the crowd. Then I told them the truth. I had not lost my job. My company had not folded. I earned $200,000 a month, and I held the note on this house. Marcus laid 3 documents on the table.
The credit card debt, to be repaid in full within 90 days, or referred to authorities for identity fraud. The mortgage, restructured under terms more generous than any bank would have offered, with automatic foreclosure proceedings triggered by 3 consecutive missed payments. And a standing demand letter, waiting in a drawer, that we hoped never to use. My mother stood up and began to cry, and to recount every sacrifice she had ever made. I told her I did not doubt she had made them. I told her that the basic duties of a parent do not grant the right to financially exploit a child for a decade. My sister said I was throwing my family into the street. I told her that a woman who had lived rent-free in a cottage for 12 years without contributing $1 to the mortgage or the utilities was perhaps the last person in that room who should be concerned about where she would live. She went silent. It was the first time in my life I had ever heard her go completely silent. My father looked at the documents. His hands were flat on the table. After a long while, he said, "So that is it. You are done with us." I told him I was done with the arrangement.
I was not done being his daughter, if he ever wanted me to be one. Something moved in his face that I had not seen before. I cannot tell you what it was, but it was new. 6 months have passed since that Saturday. My father has made every mortgage payment on time, 6 for 6. He texts me the same 4 words after each one. Payment sent on time. He has not apologized. He has not called. But he has not missed. And for a man who spent 60 years speaking only in transactions, I have come to understand that maybe the closest he knows how to come to, I am trying. My mother sends a short text every Sunday morning. No bills, no requests, just small things. Beautiful day here. Made your grandmother's peach cobbler. Or simply, love you. I have not replied to any of them yet, but I read every one. My sister has not contacted me since a phone call in which she offered what she described as an apology, but which was, in practice, a detailed explanation of why nothing was her fault. I told her what a real apology sounds like. She hung up. That may have been our last conversation. Or it may not be. I have stopped trying to predict it.
My aunt flew to Charlotte last month, and we had dinner at a place with cloth napkins. We laughed more in 2 hours than I had laughed in 2 years. At the end of the night, she stopped on the sidewalk and took my hand and said, "I am proud of you. Not because you won, because you stopped playing a game that was rigged from the start." In December, I closed on a 2-bedroom condo in Charlotte. The down payment was almost exactly equal to what I had wired to a house that erased my bedroom. The first night, I sat on my couch, in my home, bought with my money, and I ate takeout and drank a glass of wine and listened to the city below me. It was quiet. It was mine. Being alone did not feel like being abandoned. It felt like breathing. I did not buy my parents' mortgage to punish them. I bought it because it was the only language my family had ever understood, and I had finally decided to speak it from the correct side of the table. If you are in a family where your value is measured entirely by what you provide, I want to leave you with the thing that took me 32 years to understand. That is not love. That is a transaction, and you do not owe compound interest on being born.
You are allowed to love someone and refuse to let them hurt you. Those 2 things do not cancel each other out. A boundary is not a wall. It is a door with a lock. You decide who gets a key, and more importantly, you decide who has to knock first. My name is Olivia. I am 32 years old, and the most valuable thing I own is not the mortgage note, or the condo, or the corner office with my name on the door. It is the ability to sit on my own balcony on a Tuesday morning, drink coffee I made for myself, look at a skyline I earned, and feel no debt, no guilt, no obligation to pick up a ringing phone, simply because the caller shares my last name. Take care of yourself. You have earned it.